Hi, welcome back to the EpsteinLand series and to this episode, The Paper Trail of Power. In the original 6 episodes of this series, we described a system, an operating system of elite impunity, built deliberately over decades through legal decisions, intellectual cover, and political mechanisms designed to protect the powerful from the consequences that everyone else faces. And in this video, I want to take that argument one step further. I want to tell you how we can dismantle this system, not with a hope, but with a mechanism. Theodore Roosevelt called them the malefactors of great wealth. That phrase was dead on for its time. Men who did wrong with their fortunes, who corrupted the political system in which they operated, who treated democratic accountability as an inconvenience to be waved away with massive wealth. A century later, Heather Cox Richardson has given this network a name I find more dead on as well, the predator class. Here is why I prefer it. A malefactor merely does wrong. A predator hunts. It selects targets. It's organized, patient, and systematic. It does not accidentally cause harm. It is structured around the causing of harm to others for its own benefit. And yet, not every member of the predator class is a conscious predator. That distinction matters. For some, Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump, the predation is deliberate and knowing. The impunity is the point. For others, it is the predation of those who have so thoroughly internalized the mythology of the self-made American capitalist that they are genuinely oblivious to the harm they cause. They are the captains of industry that American culture has mythologized and lionized like no other society on earth. They do not see themselves as predators. They see themselves as the engine, the natural ruling class. That self-perception does not reduce their guilt. It just explains their confidence. The predator class did not simply organically arise from the capitalistic ooze. It was architecturally enabled. And before we get to the legal architecture, we need to acknowledge the intellectual cover that preceded it. In 1970, Milton Friedman published his famous New York Times Magazine essay declaring that the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits, and that any executive who considered broader obligations to workers, to communities, or to the nation as a whole was guilty of pure and unadulterated socialism. Now, Friedman didn't invent greed, he laundered it. He gave the predator class a Nobel Prize-winning economist's argument for doing exactly what they wanted to do anyway. The Ivy League provided the social cover. The economics departments of Chicago, Harvard, and Princeton produced the framework. And Ronald Reagan translated that framework into policy, deregulating the constraints that had kept predatory capitalism in check since the New Deal. By the time Citizens United was decided, the predator class already had the academy, the think tanks, and the policy apparatus on its side. The courts simply completed the structure. The destruction of legal accountability began not in 2010, but in 1976. In the aftermath of Watergate, Congress passed contribution limits and created the Federal Election Commission. The premise was simple. Unlimited money from corporations and wealthy donors creates corruption. Cap the money, prevent the corruption. The Supreme Court immediately began dismantling this premise. Then came 3 decisions that completed the structure. Decision 1, Citizens United. In January 2010, 5 justices held that corporations have the same First Amendment speech rights as individual citizens and that spending money in elections is a form of protected speech. Unlimited corporate money into politics, laundered through shell packs. Now, most people know Citizens United. Fewer know what came next. The second decision, speechnow.org, 2 months later. The D.C. Circuit held that individuals could make unlimited contributions to independent expenditure groups. This is the decision that actually created super PACs. Citizens United opened the door. SpeechNow.org walked right through it. Together, they converted American elections into an auction in which only the predator class gets to bid, and in which they largely control the legacy media that covers the bidding. The result: 50 billionaires now contribute more to American political campaigns than all small donors combined. Let that sink in. 97% of super PAC money from the top 1% of donors. The auction is not a metaphor, it is our reality. But unlimited money in elections was not sufficient protection for the predator class. They also needed assurance that once they bought access, using it couldn't be prosecuted as bribery. The Supreme Court provided it twice. In 2016, Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell received over $175,000 in gifts, a Rolex, designer clothing, vacation trips, wedding catering, in exchange for government meetings and promotional events. The court unanimously reversed his conviction. The Rolex was fine. The catering was fine. The vacation was fine. In 2024, Mayor James Snyder was convicted of steering city contracts to a local company and received $13,000 afterwards. The court, 6-3, ruled that federal bribery laws do not prohibit gratuities paid after the official act. Gratuities, like he was their concierge. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote in dissent that the majority had handed every corrupt official in America a roadmap. Pay the official after the fact, keep it informal, never put anything in writing, and the law cannot touch you. 6 justices handed that roadmap to every corrupt official in America. And then there's a 4th ruling that extends the architecture to its logical conclusion. Trump v. United States, 2024. Presidents now have sweeping immunity from criminal prosecution for their official acts. The predator class at the apex of executive power is effectively above the law by judicial decree. Remember when they used to howl about liberal judicial activists on the court? Before I go further, I want to acknowledge something important. I was in the middle of drafting a piece about all of this, specifically about applying Grover Norquist's pledge model to anti-corruption reform, when I came across an organization called Represent.us. They have been in this fight for over a decade. They have helped pass nearly 200 anti-corruption and pro-democracy reforms at the city and state level. They have organized millions of Americans across party lines. Their current Congressional Courage campaign is doing important work, applying direct constituent pressure to individual members of Congress, district by district. Their motto is sophisticated, field-tested, and working to some degree. But the main experience illustrates both the power and the limits of what's possible without a constitutional amendment. In 2023, Maine voters passed comprehensive campaign finance reform with 75% support. A voters versus billionaires issue in a purple state. Every partisan line was crossed, and then the courts began dismantling it under the very legal architecture the reform was designed to fix. That is not a failure of strategy. It is proof that constitutional amendments must be the North Star. I am not proposing to duplicate what they are doing. I am proposing to add to it, specifically a blunter weapon. M. Stephen Fish, the UC Berkeley political scientist whose book Comeback I discussed in episode 5 of this series, argues that the opposition to Trumpism keeps losing because it keeps bringing a policy brief to a dominance contest. The predator class does not win because its arguments are better. It wins because its style is dominant, bold, unapologetic, emotionally compelling, organized around the projection of power. Fish calls this high dominance politics, not aggression for its own sake, but a political style that names things directly, signals strength rather than accommodation, leads with moral clarity rather than technocratic nuance. The policy brief loses, always, over and over again. We've seen it over and over again. Anat Shenker-Osorio makes the complementary point from the messaging side. The messages that move people are not the policy briefs. They are the ones that trigger genuine moral emotion, anger at injustice, pride in doing what's right, shame at betrayal. Here is the test. Which of these 2 sentences moves you? Millions of families lost their homes. That is a tragedy. The actor is hidden. J.P. Morgan Chase took millions of families' homes. That is a crime, with a name. Passive construction hides the actor. Active construction names the predator. What I am proposing draws directly on both Fish and Shenker-Osorio. It is not a petition. It is not a scorecard. It is a mechanism designed to be as dominant and as specific as the problem it addresses. And so it also draws on Grover Norquist. In 1986, at Ronald Reagan's urging, Grover Norquist founded Americans for Tax Reform and began circulating a simple piece of paper, the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. For 40 years, that mechanism has shaped American fiscal policy more than any think tank, any election, any president. Not because Norquist had superior arguments, but because he had a mechanism. The pledge was binary. You signed it or you didn't. The pledge was public. Every voter in every district can look up their representative in 30 seconds. The pledge is permanent. Breaking it after signing it is worse than not signing it. The breach becomes the story. And crucially, the pledge was backed by the credible threat of a primary challenge. Any Republican who broke it knew that Norquist's organization would fund and support a primary opponent. That threat, real, specific, electoral, is what gave the piece of paper its power. It is worth pausing to note the irony. After Reagan and Gingrich, Norquist was perhaps more responsible than any other single actor for cementing the political supremacy of the predator class. The pledge locked in the policy architecture, deregulation, financialization, the systematic defunding of public institutions that allow predatory capitalism. We are proposing to use his own weapon against the system he helped build. The Democracy First Pledge asks candidates at every level, federal, state, and local, to commit in writing to supporting 3 constitutional amendments and 1 immediate legislative fix. Amendment 1, reverse Citizens United and SpeechNow.org. Corporations are not people. Money is not speech. Every dollar spent in American elections is traceable, disclosed, and subject to democratically established limits. Amendment 2, close the McDonnell and Snyder loopholes, define official acts and gratuities in federal and state bribery statutes so that the gift economy, luxury travel, post-act payments, influence peddling, prediction market betting is tied to policy outcomes is criminal. Can I say parenthetically how astounding it is that we use the word gratuities in this context? Anyway, Amendment 3, reverse Trump versus the United States. No president, no official, no member of the government is above the law. For 250 years, this was not a radical proposition. It was the founding premise of the American Republic. The 2024 ruling shredded that premise to protect one man. It cannot stand. And the immediate legislative fix. Congress passed the Stock Act in 2012 to theoretically prevent members from trading stocks on insider information unavailable to ordinary citizens. The penalty for the violation? $200. A member of Congress earns $174,000 a year. Before the insider trading, the act has never produced a single prosecution. Replace it with a genuine ban with criminal enforcement. This does not require an amendment. It requires only the political will that the predator class has spent decades ensuring that Congress lacks. Here's how the pressure mechanism works. Every candidate who signs goes on a public list committed to democracy first. Every candidate who refuses or fails to respond goes on a separate public list, not committed to anti-corruption. Note what the second label does. It does not accuse, it describes. The candidates made that choice themselves, and in a primary, that description is a weapon. The wall of accountability is self-updating. Every signing is an event worth amplifying. Every refusal is content. The question, why did candidate X refuse to sign the anti-corruption pledge, is a story that writes itself, and in the age of social media, it writes itself at scale. Just to give you a better idea what I envision, here's a draft version. Pause and take a look if you like. I've also decided that every candidate who sends me a fundraising letter is getting a copy of this in the mail in return. It's only fair. Now here is the objection I anticipate. Constitutional amendments are impossible. 2/3 of both the House and the Senate must ratify. Ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures is required. That's 38 states. Generational time frame. It's unrealistic. The polling says otherwise. Survey data from the Center for Public Integrity says 75% of Americans support a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United. This includes 66% of Republicans and 85% of Democrats. A separate analysis found 74% support in very red congressional districts and 76% in very blue ones. This is not a partisan issue among voters. It is only a partisan issue among the politicians the predator class has purchased. 22 states and hundreds of cities have already passed resolutions supporting constitutional amendments. A Republican bill sponsored in Missouri would make it the 24th state. The procedural hurdle is real. 290 votes in the House, 67 in the Senate, 38 states to ratify. This is not a short-term project, but it is not an impossible one. And crucially, it is the only project that produces a durable result. Maine proves the point. Every legislative win without an amendment is temporary. The predator class has built a legal system specifically designed to protect itself from democratic reform. Only an amendment is beyond its reach. The political will of elected officials is the missing variable. That is exactly what the pledge mechanism is designed to supply. The predator class will call this agenda radical. They will say it is dangerous to business, to innovation, to freedom. They said that about Theodore Roosevelt. They said it about Franklin Roosevelt. They said it about Lena Khan. And they were right. It is dangerous. It's dangerous to their rule. Franklin Roosevelt, speaking at Madison Square Garden in 1936, named his enemies plainly: business and financial monopoly, reckless banking, class antagonism, war profiteering, what his cousin Theodore had called the malefactors of great wealth. And then he said something that has echoed across 80 years of American politics. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred. That is not anger. That is clarity. The clarity of someone who knows exactly who he is fighting for and exactly who he is fighting against. The Democracy First Pledge is not a petition, not a scorecard. It's a blunt instrument, wielded with confidence, specificity, and moral clarity that Fish and Schenker Osorio tell us is the only thing that actually works against dominant power. They are unanimous in their hate for this agenda. Let's welcome their hatred. The full piece with all my references is on my Substack at christopherhughes.substack.com. The Democracy First Pledge is linked there, and on Daily Kos. These links are helpful for you. If this landed for you, share it. Send it to someone who is angry at the system but hasn't been given the right explanation for why it is the way it is, or the right mechanism for changing it. And if you want to help build the wall of accountability, reach out. This works if enough people use it. I'm Chris Hughes. Thank you for watching.